Iconic anime criminal groups. When it comes to making a masterpiece of an anime, you kind of need one. Naruto has the Akatsuki, One Piece has the Warlords, Bleach has the Arrancar. People tune in to watch these shows as much for the criminals as they do the heroes. And this rule applies even outside of the big three. Hunter x Hunter has the Akatsuki, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood has the Homunculi. And while the concept of a villain organization has been baked into fiction for as long as fiction has existed, there are few that are as complicated as the Homunculi in Fullmetal Alchemist. See, we understand that the Akatsuki are a group of lovable rogues who try to steal everything that they can. We understand that the Warlords are incredibly powerful pirates that have been appointed by the world government to keep other pirates in check. And while on the surface level, a lot of people understand that in Fullmetal Alchemist, the Homunculi are named after the 7 deadly sins, that's pretty much where the understanding of the homunculi stops. And that's not necessarily the viewer or the reader's fault. The homunculi are kind of complicated, especially when you begin to wade into the depths that are pride and father and wrath. Everything from the creation of the first homunculi father to the creation of all the other homunculi, the 7 deadly sins, is kind of confusing, especially when you take into account things like the sign of Ouroboros and how their powers work. So today I want to do an in-depth dive on all things homunculi. See, today's video was supposed to originally be all homunculi ranked and explained, but then I realized sitting down and explaining the lore of every single homunculi and how they pertain to the story and their influences while trying to explain how powerful they is would be a 2-hour video. So I've decided instead to kind of make this a 2-parter, where the first part is explaining how the homunculi came to be, how their powers work and how they play into the story and what their influences are, and the second part being how hard they punch you. So without further ado, let's get into everything you need to know about the homunculi. But before we get started on telling you everything you need to know about an anime that's been over for, I don't know, almost 10 years, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, hit that noti bell. And if you guys like me talking about anime, you're gonna love my brand new anime podcast, We Talk is Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. They have 100 offices nationwide and more than 800 lawyers. But more than anything, they make the legal process easy. You see, people get injured every single day, and a lot of the time, they deserve compensation for those injuries. But finding a lawyer and building a case to get that money is an intimidating and daunting process. Or at least, it used to be. See, Morgan & Morgan is simplifying the process, making it easier for you to get money that you deserve. Much in the same way that things like DoorDash and Grubhub made getting food to your door easier, when before you had to find a number in the yellow pages and call them and put in an order and just hope that one day that pizza would make it to your door. But simplification of your life has now gone beyond getting Chinese food delivered to your doorstep. Thanks to Morgan & Morgan, things like recovering from an injury with the money you deserve are as simple as ordering food to your doorstep. And they have a proven track record to do this, as Morgan & Morgan has recovered $15 billion for their clients. And submitting an injury claim with Morgan & Morgan is more like using an app than hiring a lawyer. It's closer to ordering takeout than hiring a lawyer. From the comfort of your own home, in the comfort of your own phone, you can have a lawyer battling for your compensation like that, submitting an injury claim without ever having to leave your couch. And if that's not enough for you, it only takes 8 clicks or less to file a claim with Morgan & Morgan today. So what are you guys waiting for? If you've ever been injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan today. It's so easy. You can submit a form in 8 clicks or less without ever having to worry about leaving your couch. For more information, go to forthepeople.com/weebcommander or dial #law, also known as #529. Who would have thought that finding a lawyer was as easy as scrolling on your phone or dialing 3 numbers on your cell phone? This is a paid advertisement. So the homunculi, an idea that's been around for hundreds of years, an idea derived from a legendary medieval concept of an artificially created human, brought to life through the means of alchemy. See, alchemy as a concept has been around for almost 1,000 years. Long before we had science or biology or anatomy, we had alchemy, where through the combination of different elements or herbs, people tried to create entirely new things. Now, when you talk about alchemy in the real world, most people think of turning lead into gold. But a concept that was even grander than turning lead into gold in the medieval times was artificially creating a human. And we know that humans have long been obsessed with the idea of artificially created humans because over 200 years ago, Mary Shelley wrote a book called Frankenstein. And what's even grander than that is that nowadays we actually have the scientific capacity to more likely than not create artificially created humans. We do have the technology, we just don't do it because ethics. And this obsession with artificially created life is also very present in the Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood universe, specifically in Amestris. However, the idea of a homunculus working successfully is considered a farce, a legendary tale, because no alchemist, regardless of how talented they are, has ever achieved anything even close to the creation of a homunculus. And Amestrian alchemists are forbidden from even looking into this because it counts as human transmutation. But even though the creation of these beings is technically not allowed, 8 of them have actually been created in secrecy, and they are known as the homunculi. See, these 8 homunculi are father in the 7 deadly sins. And I have to read them because I don't remember what they are off the top of my head. They're pride, lust, greed, gluttony, wrath, sloth, and envy. And all of these homunculi, outside of pride, carry the mark of Ouroboros. Now, the Ouroboros symbol is a symbol as old as the idea of homunculi. It's a mystical symbol that usually depicts either a dragon or a snake eating its own tail, which is meant to represent the cyclical nature of life, with the head of the dragon representing the start of life, with the tail that it's devouring representing death, which is meant to represent the perpetual nature of life and death. And it's actually believed that the hexagram in the middle of the circle of Ouroboros and the circle of Ouroboros itself are the foundation of which transmutation circles were built upon in Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. But who are these homunculi? How were they created? What are their powers? Well, in order to answer all those questions, we're gonna start this video off in the way that we tend to start these videos off. At the beginning. See, the first ever homunculus was Father. You see, Father was created several hundred years before the events of Full Metal, in a country that now no longer exists called Xerxes. See, the reason that people don't really understand the homunculi is mostly because Father's backstory is kind of complicated, but we're gonna dive into it now. Father started off as an entity inside of a flask, but Father's story begins even before that. You see, Father originally was an entity that existed beyond the gate. And if you've watched our video about truth where we explained the god of the Full Metal universe, then you'll know what the gate is, but if you haven't, let's go over it quickly. See, the gate is just that, it's a gate. However, beyond this gate, which is protected by truth, the omnipresent, omnipotent god that exists in everything in the Full Metal universe is all of the information and power of the universe. And those that attempt human transmutation are pulled into this gate. Now, the amount of time that they spend in the gate is dependent on what they sacrifice to truth. If you sacrifice just your leg, you spend less time beyond the gate than if you sacrifice your entire body. This is what happened with Ed and Al. Somehow, the alchemist to the king of Xerxes was able to contain a small bit of the entity that existed beyond the gate and put it in a flask. And not only was this alchemist to the king of Xerxes able to contain this spirit, but also bring it to the physical world. Now, he was able to stabilize this entity to bring it into the real world by using the blood of one of the slaves of the king. And this entity became incredibly important to the kingdom of Xerxes. Because mind you, this entity was a piece of the entirety of the knowledge of the universe. Meaning that this dwarf in a flask that they called it had an immense amount of knowledge. Most important part of that knowledge being that the dwarf in the flask knew alchemy. However, the dwarf in the flask couldn't do alchemy of its own. It could only teach others how to do alchemy, as the flask created out of the blood of slave 23 was the only thing that was keeping the dwarf in the flask alive. However, the dwarf in the flask wanted to live outside of the flask, and therefore the dwarf in the flask befriended slave 23. And it's at this point that the dwarf in the flask named slave 23 Van Hohenheim. However, simply becoming friends with Hohenheim wasn't enough to satiate the dwarf in the flask's need for companionship. See, the dwarf in the flask was incredibly envious of the human race because the human race was able to come together and bond and help each other. Well, the dwarf in the flask was one of a kind. It had nobody else like him. It had no support system. And therefore, in order to rid itself of this envy and feel as though it wasn't alone, it replaced these feelings of loneliness with hubris, believing itself to be a god and wanting to rise above all humans in terms of power. And it wasn't until years later that the king of Xerxes finally revealed why he needed the dwarf in the flask. See, the king of Xerxes, who was also incredibly arrogant and out of touch, wanted to be immortal, and therefore the dwarf in the flask tricked the king of Xerxes into believing that he could help him become immortal. He told the king of Xerxes to make the entire kingdom of Xerxes into a transmutation circle by creating a massive amount of bloodshed on each side of a hexagram. However, he tricked the king of Xerxes so only him and Hohenheim were standing in the middle of the transmutation circle. Therefore, everybody outside of him and Hohenheim was sacrificed in the kingdom of Xerxes to make the first ever philosopher's stone. And with the power of the this Philosopher's Stone, the dwarf in the flask was able to open the Gate of Truth. As usually one has to give something up to enter the Gate of Truth, like your arm or your womb or your entire body, with the use of a Philosopher's Stone, you can replace any bodily sacrifice with just the Philosopher's Stone. And the dwarf in the flask used the power behind the Gate of Truth to make both him and Hohenheim immortal bodies. And considering the fact that these immortal bodies were made with the power of a Philosopher's Stone, both him and Hohenheim were essentially living Philosopher's Stones, with the power of hundreds of thousands of souls split between the two of them. However, Hohenheim didn't really want to murder everybody. I mean, he wasn't happy about being a slave, but he didn't want to murder everybody. So he was like, thanks for immortality, and just kind of dipped. However, the reason that the dwarf in the flask did all of this is because he was lonely. But now he had a body, so he could be one of the humans, except for the fact that he was immortal and all powerful. So he went on a little walk, and eventually he found people, and he taught these people alchemy, and they became known as the alchemists of the East. However, giving people guns and teaching them how to use it is how America got Al-Qaeda. Yeah, we made them to fight the Russians. If you haven't learned that, well then your history class is unfortunately kinda lying to you. So Father, not currently known as Father, just currently known as Homunculus, decided, let's set up a couple of barriers here to make sure that this alchemy I just taught all these people cannot be used against me. And so Father put himself underground, specifically under what would eventually become Central Command. You know the big fortified tower in the middle of Amestris, where the Fuhrer, also known as Wrath, lives? But why did he put himself underground? Time to talk about tectonic energy. See, alchemy can be used by humans if they harness the tectonic energy of the Earth. That is to say, if they harness the energy of tectonic plates far under Earth's crust colliding into each other. Which makes sense when you consider the fact that tectonic plates coming together is quite literally what terraforms the entirety of the Earth, making mountains as tall as Mount Everest. The energy generated by tectonic plate collision is immense, and humans can technically harness that power to power alchemy. But Father didn't want that. Father didn't want humans tapping into the power of the Earth, and therefore Father went underground to make himself the buffer between tectonic power and humans. And while blocking the power from the tectonic plates, he released his own power derived from the souls of Xerxes upwards, which meant that all alchemy in Amestris wasn't actually being channeled through the power of the tectonic plates, but through the souls of Xerxes being released by Father. And because the alchemists of the East settled above where Father was, they used their alchemy to build an incredibly powerful kingdom known as Amestris, which isn't the but it's close. And Amestris is a puppet government secretly run by Father. So what's Father's grand goal in all of this? Well, Father still doesn't have what he would consider a perfect body, and honestly same. However, in order to achieve this perfect body, Father needs to create another huge transmutation circle. However, this transmutation circle is a bit different. See, in order to become a perfect being, Father obviously needs bloodshed on all of the key points around the transmutation circle, which is why he manipulates the Amestrian military to have conflicts on these key points on the transmutation circle. However, on top of that, he also needs a solar eclipse, as according to Edward Elric, the sun represents a man and the moon represents a woman, and when they come together, they create the perfect being. And on top of that, he needs 5 alchemists who have attempted human transmutation as sacrifices. Once you just get that super paltry laundry list done, you get to become the perfect being. And that is the core reason anything ever happens in Full Metal. However, in order to make sure that the shadow government was run in the way that Father wanted the shadow government run, he had to create the homunculi, also known as the sins, all 7 of them, which are representations of his earthly desires. Ironically, Father created the 7 sins in order to purge himself of the 7 sins that he believes make humans imperfect. That is to say that the creation of these 7 homunculi were supposed to rid him of these 7 emotions. And once he was purged of these 7 emotions, he could become an entity that was greater than mankind. Now, Father created the homunculi by using a Philosopher's Stone, since a Philosopher's Stone is able to override the rules of equivalent exchange, because otherwise the creation of a homunculi had proven to be impossible. However, the way that it's done is kind of confusing. Now, mind you, Father's entire body is a walking Philosopher's Stone, and therefore Father would take a little bit of his own Philosopher's Stone and the vice he was trying to break off of his body and inject that into a living being, at which point that living being became the sin it was named after. Now, 5 of the living beings that the sins were injected into were just humans. Either human bodies that Father transmuted, or just people he found and injected his Philosopher's Stone into. Now, while these humans, like sloth or gluttony, don't look natural, they're still just humans. The real exception to the rule is envy and pride. You see, envy was actually created using a Leviathan creature created by Father prior, which is why she's able to turn into that green 4-legged entity with a bunch of faces that Colonel Mustang just proceeds to burn the eyeballs out of. You've just given me a bigger target. Bah, 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 bah. Greatest scene in anime, maybe. Well, Pride is created from Father's semi-divine existence being an image. See, Pride was the first and strongest homunculi that Father created, and he was placed in the role of Salim Bradley, which is the Fuhrer's son. Now, the reason that Pride doesn't have a mark of Ouroboros is because he's supposed to be Father's actual image, the only out of the homunculi created with Father's divine essence, and therefore by far and away the strongest. He's supposed to be mini Father, essentially. However, Pride and Envy also have different advantages over the rest of the homunculi. See, human-based homunculi die when their Philosopher's Stone runs out of power. However, homunculi based off of non-humans like Envy and Pride can survive even after the Philosopher's Stone has been depleted. It's at this point that they devolve into their own innermost desires, becoming a physical representation of everything that they want, which is usually based off the sin they're named after. But whether they're human-based or not, there is a lot of consistencies between all 7 or 8 homunculi. And the biggest thing is that they believe that they're superior to all human beings, which makes sense when you consider the fact that they are created through Father's essence and he wants to be an eternal, all-knowing, all-seeing God, specifically because he believes he's greater than mankind. And this leads almost all of the homunculi to hate humans, with Envy taking pride in torturing them, Pride having sadistic nature with them, and really only Greed ever befriending any humans. But do homunculi have the right to believe that they're greater than humans? Well, let's talk about their abilities and I'll let you be the judge. Well, homunculi to begin with technically shouldn't exist. They're humans with no souls. And as they have no souls, they're technically out of touch with things like the Gate of Truth. They all have superhuman abilities, being faster, stronger, and tougher than all humans. They don't age. They're immune to all sicknesses and poisons. They can heal from what would be fatal injuries to humans like decapitation, so long as their Philosopher's Stone still has energy, making them, so long as the Philosopher's Stone is ticking, immortal. But the homunculi not having souls kind of works for them. See, in the Full Metal universe, the shape of your soul is very important, because the shape of your soul is the thing that can get pulled through the Gate of Truth or sacrificed to enter the Gate of Truth. And because of this, Truth, when you see him, has the components that you've given up to enter the Gate of Truth, which is why when Ed sees Alphon's Gate of Truth, he realizes that Alphonse gave up his entire body, and therefore that truth is actually just Alphonse. But because homunculi don't have soul, they're able to control their body in the way that people with souls can't. That is to say that the homunculi can change the shape of their body. But they can go beyond just changing the shape of their body, they can change their own genetic or molecular makeup. Greed is able to turn the carbon into his body's hard as diamonds. Gluttony can make his saliva so acidic that he can bite through and digest anything he wants in a matter of seconds. Lust can turn her fingers into lance-like weapons that she can use to attack from a distance. Envy can change his body, and yes, I forgot Envy was a boy for a while there, into any animal or crude weaponry. But at the same time, them not having souls also works against them. Because like I've already stated, not having a soul means you don't get to interact with the Gate of Truth. And not being able to interact with the Gate of Truth means a couple of things. Most importantly, that you're a non-alchemist. See, we learned from the end of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood that when Edward gave up his own gate to get Alphonse back, he lost his ability to do alchemy. And now this isn't because Ed gave up his soul, it's because he gave up his connection to the Gate of Truth, something that the homunculi have never had. And because they can't open the Gate of Truth inside of them, they don't have the ability to do alchemy. The only exception to this rule is Wrath, also known as King Bradley or the Fuhrer. But the only reason that Wrath is able to use alchemy is because he has Edward's lost limbs. Homunculi also have other weaknesses, like their artificiality. See, like we've already stated, the homunculi are either created using existing humans or transmuted based on existing humans. Therefore, every homunculi can draw their presence back to an original actual human. But this isn't a good thing. It's kind of like if you travel back in time, you should never come into contact with your previous self. If the homunculi are faced with either the person they're based off or even just a lock of hair from the person they're based off, they'll become weakened to the point of immobility, at which point you can just stabby. But the level of weakening here kind of depends on the homunculi. Some homunculi, like Sloth and Lust, are absolutely paralyzed by coming even anywhere near their remains. While Pride and Greed, while hindered, were still very much able to function while in the presence of their remains. So is that the only way to kill a homunculus? Expose them to the remains? No, not really. A homunculus is just kind of like a final boss. You just gotta do a lot of damage. Every single time that a homunculus has to recover from being fatally wounded, they have to use some of the energy of their red stone. And when the energy of that red stone is depleted, the homunculus is now just like any other person. A homunculus with a depleted red stone, if they take a bullet to the head, is not getting up. And there's really only two ways to deplete the red stone of a homunculus: kill them or damage them a lot like Roy Mustang did to Envy, or use the flamel transmutation. See, the flamel transmutation causes the homunculus to spit up the red stone, causing them to be just as vulnerable as any human on Earth. See, the flamel transmutation actually refers to real alchemical practices. A lot of alchemy refers to trying to transmute things things into other things like lead to gold, the Flamelian process of alchemy was trying to fix the volatile. That is to say that Flamelian alchemy refers to all chemical practices that are curative in nature, like the creation of elixirs and potions. In fact, just the word flamel refers to an ancient and mystical symbol of a snake draped across a cross, and it's believed that the flamel was actually inspired by the rod of Asclepius, which was the ancient Greek symbol for medicine. It's actually still pretty much the symbol for medicine. Most hospitals will work it into their logo somehow. And once the homunculi that you've used the flamel transmutation on regurgitates their red stone, then you can kill them just in one shot. Outside of the main homunculi, there's also something known as mannequin soldiers. See, these are lesser homunculi created by the Amestrian government, presumably under the care of Father. These homunculi, like the Sins, have also been injected with philosopher's stones. However, unlike the original homunculi, they lack intelligence and operate on basal instinct. Envy refers to them as puppets who operate only on the idea that they need to eat whatever in front of them. However, since these are bodies created out of philosopher's stones, Envy is able to use these bodies to recreate himself after he'd been turned into his small parasitic form by Colonel Mustang. Now, they don't have the regeneration ability of the Sins or Father, but they are able to operate even after their head has been blown off. And while they aren't able to talk per se, they are able to vocalize, but what they're vocalizing is the screams of the citizens of Xerxes. So like, not the best guys to have around. And that's it. Basically everything you need to know about homunculi as a whole. We could obviously go further into what happens with Father, but that would just be me explaining the plot of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Like, obviously Father and Hohenheim have their final battle, and Edward and Al have their touching moment at the Gate of Truth. And Father, because he never changed, had a blank Gate of Truth and didn't realize that Truth was the entity sitting in front of him and not the actual gate. But maybe one day I'll sit down and make a You Know Nothing About Father, where we do an actual in-depth dive on Father as a character. But this is not that video. But honestly, it is crazy that in the span of 60 or so episodes, and I think only 108 chapters, that I can get this much content out of Full Metal. It's such a rich and action-packed universe. Is there anything else you guys want to see me cover from Full Metal that I haven't already said I'm gonna cover? Did I miss anything? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. I'm gonna be honest, I honestly need to make these videos just to remember what happened in Full Metal.